We haven't been overwhelmed yet, but it's yet to be seen. But we have ourselves had some contact with people in church circles. And so we've had two different families. One lady and her son were in our home for a while. And after 3 or 4 days, they moved to be with Miranda and her family. And then the other family joined a gal who was part of a member of our church, who is Ukrainian. And they are very active. They were involved in church leadership in Kiev, and so Andre and Marina Noyes and their two daughters are with us. And that's exciting because for now, at least until they get a chance to go home, they will be a very active part of the church in Antwerp. Would you say anything more about how Belgians? I think it's interesting. Belgians are either like us, they're involved hands-on because they have a connection, or they're just involved at a distance of saying, my heart goes out to you. Let's see what our government does to take care of these people, kind of thing. They
Mm.
all want to help, but a lot of them don't understand about how to help personally. So it's kind of interesting.
Well, I was able to take the girl, that's the woman with her son who's staying with Miranda, her, and then the other two families. I spent days taking them to Brussels to get registered. And I was very pleasantly surprised to see how many people were opening their homes
Mm.
to the refugees, because Belgium does have already an influx of refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan, and basically the refugee centers have been full for a while, and the government housing is also full. So it's been really nice to see that Belgians are actually opening their homes and letting people come, especially there are other Ukrainians that live in Belgium. And so they are also opening their homes to other Ukrainians. But I think it's in the future to see how much that still continues or how long they stay. I think, see how long the people have to stay in other people's houses.
Yeah, so that's one question. If people are opening their homes, and that's what's happened initially, is the ones who have come have been picked up in homes, and the government then had to start making preps for other solutions for the larger numbers. And so it'll be interesting to see if it goes on to 3 or 4 months, how many people start to kind of burn out by having guests in their homes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But I think that the will is there,
Yeah.
and they're getting after it. Yeah. Well, I think a lot of the determination of that answer that question is where they're coming from in Ukraine. The ones that are in the West were the last ones to be threatened by Russia, and actually now that threat has backed off because Russia has kind of turned around. They couldn't take Kyiv, and so they turned around and kind of gone back to focus on the East. And so the threat in the West is much reduced, if not, I won't say gone. I won't dare say that because we don't have the immediate hands-on knowledge of it. But the ones that were living close to the Polish border on the west side, they were already thinking, well, if we're going now, but we might not be gone for more than 2 or 3 weeks. On the other hand, the gal who's with us and was with us, and they came first. They left. They were refugees already 8 years ago from Donetsk when the Russian favorable forces stepped in and took over those regions. They fled to Kharkiv in the north, and now Kharkiv is one of the main places that has been. And so they fled. She in 8 years she has been a refugee twice, and so she has no inclination to think she's going back to Ukraine anytime soon because her home in Ukraine is in the east and it's all blown to smithereens. So that's a big difference about how they determine what their plan is in going back or not.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does. She doesn't act like she wants to go back. There may be some Ukrainians that have left, like her, maybe had to flee 2 times, and they don't want to go back. But there
Mhm.
are the other family. They're like thinking
Yeah.
they'll go back anytime, and they're going to help rebuild the country. There are certainly those
It-
Ukrainians too that can't wait to go back to rebuild the country.
Yeah, even though there has been some damage in the cities around Kyiv, especially to the north, this couple is from downtown Kyiv, and there was not very much destruction there. And they're just thinking, well, when things are open, we're going to go back and start
Mhm.
on making life normal again. So it is a big difference on where people are from. Well, initially, within a week of hearing of the invasion, we in Antwerp just decided to send a donation. We had some money in our bank account, and we said, well, we can kick in €1,000 for this since we sent it, got it sent. And um, I just posted on Facebook. And then after some response on Facebook, I said, if anybody wants to, we have some contacts that we can send money to help in the Ukraine with the refugees. And there was such good response on my Facebook post that I went ahead and did a little email as well with the same information to basically my list of contacts in Europe. And there was response from that as well. And people wrote back and said, give us details. How can we help? Where will it go? And these various things. And so there's been good response across Europe. And it's not just coming through us. There's other people. Some of them we've said, if you as a church or people want to send directly to the contacts in Poland or in Ukraine, this is the information. If you find it easier to send to us to forward, we can do that. And then we also learned that some of our folks just north of us in the Netherlands had another contact, an American working in Ukraine, who they are also supporting or sending funds through to help the refugees. So it's a good solid response, and it's significant amounts of money. Yeah, we're encouraged by it. One contact is in Poland, in the city of Lodz, and it's a Canadian couple that we've met at the retreat in Germany in November, and so we know them. They're supported by the Hills in Fort Worth, and it's quite interesting. It's a longer story, but basically they were involved in a church that wanted to help, and they had refugees coming. The day that we first made contact, they had 50,000 people come through Lodz, and then increased from there. Within a week, it was up to 70 and 80,000 a day coming into Lodz. Now, not all of them were staying. A lot of them were moving on. And some of those folks ended up in Germany and were taken care of in Cologne or other places where we have contacts. But that's basically what they're doing. And that couple is now part of a group, a new church plant that is also in the middle of negotiating. They've negotiated a contract with a hotel that had shut down for COVID and was trying to open again. And so they had rooms vacant, and they negotiated for 15 rooms to house 40 people for the next 3 months. And so that's their project. And we'll provide information in an email about the details of that project. But the exciting thing there is we got to know the Polish couple that Brandon and Jessica are working with now, and they're just really sweet. But also Magda, the girl, told us about her vision that they just need to buy this hotel and make a church center out of it. So we're kind of jumping on that and seeing how far it can be taken. So if there's any people who want to invest in a Christian hotel in Poland, we got an address for you. So there you go. All right. So we got in touch and we got acquainted. We think we might have met Alexander Rodishev at some point at a meeting like this Sunset deal. Well, Sunset European Vision Workshop, World Vision Workshop, wherever it is. But anyway, we got in touch with him through this, and he is very active. He actually is a Sunset graduate, one of their Bible institutes in the Ukraine, and he grew up in the East. The most recent thing he posted on his Facebook was the train station that got bombed and rocketed last week, and I think 35 people were killed or something. That's his hometown. He grew up there. He grew up going to that train station to travel to where he was following his Bible studies in a Sunset satellite school. And now so those kind of things are happening, but he's an amazing guy. Carol and I are both so just impressed with just seeing his posts on Facebook. We're trying to balance between getting direct information from him to report to people who have made donations, and also just leaving him alone so he can get his work done. Because every day he's got 4 or 5 different places that he's in touch with where there's something going on. The couple that are with us, the Elvira and Mark, came through a location in the south of Ukraine where he is now located, and they're moving to pass refugees through to the church in Romania, and that's where they're coming through from that part of Ukraine. So
He's
anyway,
constantly taking people to different places to get them out, receiving them, taking them, going to the store, getting food for the areas where people are having to stay inside and receive food. He's
the
seems to constantly be doing something.
there was an
for
existing
people.
church in the town of Chernivtsi, right in the central south of Ukraine, right across the border from Cluj, Romania. And in that church, they can host 50 people at a time, and they're feeding them every day, 3 meals a day. Elvira's husband is still working there as the kind of the main cook to feed them. And they're passing through probably about half of them that usually they stay for 3 or 4 days, and then arrangements are made for them to pass through. So they don't keep the same people long term unless there's some glitch with the passage arrangement. But it's just amazing to hear the stories about what they're doing, and we're excited to be part of it. Of course. And so far, we have not had anybody come to stay at the Bible camp. We told you and Kelly that already. It's not a disappointment. It's just kind of ironic in a way. But the main thing that we have room at Bible camp for about 40 people. And mainly in our dormitory for campers, we have room for 32 kids. But that's split into boys and girls. And then each of those sections is in rooms of, 8 bunk beds. No, 4 bunk beds, 8 beds, 16. Yeah. So what we did is made a separation between those 2 rooms so that there could be separation of family groups and privacy between the 2. And I just went down, worked on a couple of doorway, walls that filled in this separation, and we'll be able to remove it again when it's camp season, so the rooms can be normal. Apart from that, people have provided extra bedding and all of the supplies, and our Flemish and Dutch people have also kicked in to provide a funding base to buy anything that is needed, such as food supplies. If we get 10 or 15 people coming, we're kind of geared up to put up as many as 20 people, but ideally it'll probably be 15 to 18, depending on how the families break down between those 4 separate rooms of 8 beds each. So that's the main thing. And again, in a way, it's not a bad thing that people say they're going to come if they need to, but then they find another place that works out for them, so they don't need to come. In contrast, just 2 hours back into Germany from where we are, the church in Germany has a camp near Frankfurt, and as soon as they threw it open, then their camp filled up with 30 people, and they've got 30 that they're managing and serving. So it's possible that they might need to transition some on over to us so they can take some more or something like that. So we've worked pretty close with the church in Cologne, especially. They helped with the financial gifts, but we helped with connecting them with people to stay in Cologne, the church in Cologne, and then the camp at Frankfurt. So.
In Belgium, like Elvira and her son Mark, because she has a dependent, she's going to be receiving 1,400 euros a month for I don't know how long, for the 3 months.
At least
I think
3
everything
months.
is 3 months.
Yeah.
So they are, once everyone registers, they go in to the social housing and social offices, and then they tell them this is how much you can receive.
Yeah.
I think it depends on a few other things, but yeah.
I'm trying to think. I think that we've had it, depending on which European country you're in, they're more vocal about when it's going to stop and when it has to be extended and when it has to be revised. But across Europe, all of the countries receiving the refugees have been assigned European funds to help with this, and so and then they have to determine, okay, how much in your location is what we call a leefloon, is basically a basic salary, a basic income. And
probably the couple who has the apartment, very likely theirs will be less, even though they have 2 children, but because they have their apartment paid for and utilities for a year, very
Yeah,
likely theirs will be a little bit
yeah,
less.
it'll be, normally speaking, it should be adjusted a little bit because they have their housing completely covered.
Yeah.
So,
But
Okay.
actually, I think, the governments are doing very well to try to, at least for 3 months, help them to receive a salary of some kind, if they can, to put them in housing. Some towns do have housing they can actually put them in, some don't, or to help them try to find a job. So yeah, I think I know from Elvira and other, instances that she talks about from people she knows, people are, they're frustrated. They want to come, they want to get a job, they want to get an apartment. But it's really, I think the government is doing amazingly well under the circumstances. There were 10,000 people a day for a few days coming through. We've got a lot of people here to take
yeah,
care of.
and
But
to put it in perspective, Belgium is a smaller country, and so much larger numbers are staying in Poland and then making their way to Germany. And then some are going to France as well. France is a little bit further for them to get to, because they have to go through Austria and Switzerland to get to France.
a few to
But
the
yeah,
Netherlands,
and
yeah.
Switzerland and
Lots of
France are getting them as well. But so our number in Belgium, at first they thought it was going to be maybe 20,000, and then after about 10 days of the war, they said, no, make that 80,000. And then they said, okay, it's likely to be about 200,000. But and that's just for Belgium, a little town of not as many people in Belgium as in New York City. We have 14 million people, and so yeah, 200,000 would be a lot, because that's about 4 times as many of the total refugees we had from Syria and Afghanistan altogether coming to Belgium. So it would be a lot. The other side of the coin is there's it's hard to describe it, but there's just a lot more sense of solidarity with the Ukrainians as refugees, because they consider them as fellow Europeans. And it's not so much a racial thing. It's just a matter of, well, the Ukrainians are really people that we should have let be in Europe already, and maybe this would not have happened. And that's kind of what's going on.
Yeah, but we'll see after 3 months. That will be the big number to see what happens after that. If the war is still on, do they still need support? So it could get tricky after 3 months if the war's still going on.
Well, it will be extended one way or the other. It's just a matter of, it'll start to become a political question of how much more can we do before our finances begin to strain. And the people that are more just accountant oriented they were already counting halfway through the last refugee crisis of how much is this going to cost us for the next 10 years in extra taxes. So
there's a little bit of jealousy showing too with the refugees that we have already are waiting for housing, and then the Ukrainians come in, and there's a little bit of this strain of, well, we've been waiting. How can you be making room for Ukrainians when we've been waiting for 5 years? So there's a little bit of that too. I heard that from someone else from Switzerland. We were in Switzerland, also the same.
And on top of that, even the Belgians that are waiting on social housing lists for 5 and 8 years to get assigned a social place where they can get a decent apartment for a reduced rent. And then the refugees come in and say, okay, here's a place for you, here's a place for you, and it's kind of awkward.
I think, your first part of the question is how can churches there help? I think, I guess at the moment, monetarily, until possibly Ukrainians go that way. Maybe if it opens, maybe we can send some on to you. But I think it's just been an interesting experience, because you want to think everything is normal when you meet them and talk to them, but then you do immediately realize, after we met them, their little boy is 8. Little boy's 8, and he's afraid of every noise. every time, I mean, even the ice cream truck scared him and he was hiding from the bell of the ice cream truck. And even now at Miranda and Derek's house, every time he hears a plane go over or something, he'll run to the basement. He's just very afraid of all noises. She said when he goes out, he watches everyone's face because he wants to see if there's signs of panic, or if someone yells or something, he's thinking maybe they need to run to a shelter. So the trauma that these kids have been under has been, it's really terrible. And one thing I know that the kids are receiving some psychological help. He is too, actually. I think, I don't know, at some point if there's, well, I guess it's the language, thinking if there's any psychological help or therapy at some point for a little bit longer or more that people may need. But even the mothers, this, the trauma that they've been through, the things that they have seen is just, you can't even imagine. That's just one of the stories. And just Elvira's, she just doesn't know, is she going or she's staying? Is she, I gave her new shoes because she only had these winter boots, and it took a week for her to change out of her, I called them her refugee boots. I'd say, Elvira, I gave you some new shoes. You can take off your refugee boots now. And it was her comfort that, and also just being prepared. She might need to go somewhere else. And she doesn't want too many clothes or things because she might need to go again. And it's just the uncertainty that they're all living under. I think just that, feeling of uncertainty is just, and just the fact we'll be riding in the car talking about something, and then all of a sudden she'll just say, just why did this have to happen? I had a house, I had a car, I had a life, and now I have nothing. She says, I'm just a baby. Everyone has to do everything for me now. I have nothing. And it's so heartbreaking to see and to just try to understand what she's going through.
Well, and on top of that, the first few days that they were with us, well, I think even before Carol was gone to the ladies' retreat, when Elvira and Mark arrived and were with me and Jesse for 2 or 3 days. But within about 2 days, one thing came up that I'm reminded of now. And she said that Mark said, the fact of the matter is Putin has done a lot of worse things in the last 3 weeks than he did the first week. But still, he was already a pretty bad guy the first week. That was obvious. But Mark still said that he prays for him. As this 8-year-old kid has a concept of faith. Well, and the other thing is that Elvira's husband, Dennis, who is cooking for 50 people every day in Chernivtsi in Ukraine, he became a Christian. I spoke to Elvira on the phone on Wednesday, and she was trying to decide if she would go ahead and come to Belgium the next day or she would stay and help out for 3 or 4 days, because an American couple that was there from Arkansas working said, please stay and help us with translating for us with the Ukrainians that don't speak any English. So she weighed back and forth, but then somebody offered to help her with a flight from Romania to Brussels. And so she went ahead and took it, and suddenly was coming the next day. Well, when I spoke to her, I asked her, is your husband a Christian? And she told me yes. And then I found out when she got there that he became a Christian that day, or maybe the day before. Let's say the day before. He had just been baptized that day. They've been together. They've got an 8-year-old kid. She's worked as a translator for Sunset churches and Bible schools. And yet her husband had just become a Christian after being involved with the people that were helping with the refugee relief efforts. So it's a lot of amazing stories around just that mother and her son that are just touching our hearts, really. So
another thing I think of a story, the other couple that's with us, Marina and Andre Noyes, with their 2 little girls. One little girl has cerebral palsy. She's 8 years old, and so it's a very difficult situation for them because she has to have treatment. And when they got here, they didn't know what they were going to do, and even thought about them going to camp. But then the girl that they were staying with, the Ukrainian woman, who is actually her best friend, she came and she said she heard through another friend whose husband works at a bank, that the bank has 2 apartments they're going to let refugees use. So this family and another family with them got apartments next to the bank. It's located right next to the bank. So it's part of the
In
bank
Antwerp,
complex.
in the city of Antwerp.
And they have one apartment for their family free for a year, and everything paid for a year, which I think this is another one of those stories that you think, wow,
Well,
there's a lot of the refugees don't know where they're going to end up. Are they going to be in a
yeah,
center for a while?
if they're staying in somebody's extra bedroom, how long is that going to last?
But
and
just
what's available for them to look forward to. But this
and
couple had a
they're
beautiful solution.
it was a beautiful solution, mainly too because they have it so difficult with their little girl, and he was actually not supposed to. You could only leave the country a father if they had 3 children. Otherwise, the man had to stay. If they had less than 3 children, the man stayed to fight. But because their child had cerebral palsy, he was allowed to leave. And so it was amazing in the first place that he could actually leave and be with his family. And now they have an apartment, and as it turned out, the hospital that can treat her is a 20-minute bus ride away. And they were just amazed that God was blessed. They feel so blessed and so humble that they're being taken care of in this way. And the therapy that she needs to have to go to a therapist is right down the street from their apartment. And just that they in such a terrible time that they feel really held up in prayer by all of the fellow Christians, and just that God has really helped them and taken care of them. They will have a need for getting braces for her. It was just time. She had an operation, and now she needs braces for her leg. So that may be a need.
That might be one thing, as we can nail down some more details on that and what the budget would be. That might be one thing we'll include as an alternate way to help, if that appeals to people specifically to help.
The government, we do have good health care, but it will be able to, we don't know for sure exactly how much it will be able to kick in for this.
The government, the European governments have gone together and said, okay, we're going to provide at least basic initial health care for all of the refugees, but we don't know how long that will be in effect. If they stay here for a year, after a year, maybe that will have to be revised. But it's at least for 3 months that they've got all the health care free and the stuff like that. Some of the funds that already came through the Springs, we have forwarded to them, and also some to the folks in Ukraine. In Ukraine, we'll have a little bit more detail about the idea of they're funding the hotel lease.
That's Poland.
In Poland.